to start with a few remarks from Nick Brady, who really has had a huge impact on this program. And it's a great honor for me to be able to introduce him. I've already been told by multiple people that he gets embarrassed quickly and that I should just get through with this quickly. But the truth is, he really is an amazing person to whom we owe great debt. He began his career in the banking industry. He worked for 34 years. Starting in 1954, he joined Dillon, Reed and Company in New York City. He really built that company, and he rose ultimately to be the chairman of the board. An enormous career in private industry. But of course, that wasn't all. He has had a tremendous political career. It began in 1982 when he was appointed by the New Jersey governor to the U.S. Senate to fill a vacancy from somebody who had retired. And in 1984, President Reagan appointed Nick Brady to be the chairman of the Presidential Commission on Executive, Legislative, and Judicial Salaries. He also served the President's Commission for Strategic Forces, the Commission on Security and Economic Assistance, and the Blue Ribbon Commission on Defense Management. There are about 25 other ones he did too, but I did want to get through it. He chaired the Presidential Task Force on Market Mechanisms in 1987. In 1988, Nick Brady became the Secretary of Treasury and served from the end of Ronald Reagan's administration through George H.W. Bush's administration, who I think he just spent the day with yesterday, and he resigned as President Clinton took office. In that time, his work was monumental. He thought up and implemented what is known as the Brady Plan. It allowed Mexico and many other developing countries at the time that had defaulted on their international debt to sell dollar-denominated bonds. And these are known still today as Brady bonds. He served as a trustee of the Rockefeller University. He's a member of the Council of Foreign Relations, and his generosity is at the heart of so many creative projects at Yale. Let's just think about it. He's given enormous amounts to the medical school. He created the Brady squash courts. He's given to the residential college expansion. And of course, with his good friend, Charlie Johnson, he really expanded and created today what is the Brady-Johnson Grand Strategy Program, the focus of all of these people tonight. Since knowing Nick, I personally have been in awe of his expansive reach. His interests are so clear. He believes in the public sector and the private sector. We have to know how to go between these seamlessly. He has a huge sense of adventure. You can see all these creative ideas he's had, and just get him talking. He's done enormous things. And his commitment to Yale is unsurpassed. We're so lucky to have you here tonight, Nick. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to put this in here to see if it works. I've learned, is it this microphone or this one? This one. Okay, good. Thank you. Betsy, thank you so much. And I have very short remarks to make. Some of them are, I wrote down, others I thought of as we approached this dinner in the last couple of days. And I have to say that much too much of the credit for this event, which is what my friend George Schultz called a stunning event. You know, the fact that you get 175 people to come back to Yale on a weekend in the fall tells you how important the thrust of this program really is. And the people that put this together, we are all partners in the way this program, this stunning program, got put together. And I start with my friend Sam Chauncey, whose idea was, go talk to John Gaddis, Paul Kennedy, and Charlie Hill. They have a lot of the same ideas that you do. And, why don't you see if that's something that can really be turned into something which they want to turn it into, but maybe you can help. And so I want to thank you, Sam, for everything you've done. You can't imagine what a person who is a quiet advocate can do to get things done. And my hat goes, I don't have a hat, but I mean, my hat goes off to Sam Chauncey. Sam, will you stand up just for 1 second? Thank you, my very dear friend. Then, of course, I think one of the things that made this dinner a great success, and I'll get to the people that were integral to the center of the program, but one of the people that made this a great success is the book that Linda Kulman wrote describing the process. This is an incredible exposition of what the program is all about. It's passed by the seniors in the program, which is no mean achievement. But it sets out, it's something you can send to people and say, what are you talking about? What is grand strategy? And I think so many of people have read what she has put down on paper, in book form, I should say. It's not on paper, it's in a book. And how useful that document is to propelling forward what we all believe in so strongly. And so, Linda, thank you very much. Will you please stand up and just say hello? Okay, let's get to the essential part of the guts of the program. They are three people: John Gaddis, Paul Kennedy, and Charlie Hill. They are people who are who have designed something that will, I am sure, I'm convinced, will change the world. And I ran into a friend of my sister's who bought a book in the New Haven bookstore the other day, and she said, I bought this book, and it's amazing what you've done. And I told her it's not me, it's done, it's somebody else who did it. And she said, you're reimagining teaching history. Now, teaching higher level history. John put me on my backside just a second. He said, wait a minute, we're not changing history, but we are changing a facet of history of how you teach it, how it's important, how people can be involved, and how important it can be if we get this job done. There's so many facets to the program, whether it's the part of bringing practitioners into the problem, or something that's very important to me, exposing different points of view on the same problem so that anybody who's listening and working in the class get to make their own mind up what they think. You're not being taught, you got to believe this, or you're not going to do well. You can listen to different things. It's unbelievably important and compelling, and it's an enormous step forward, in my opinion. So I don't think I've run into anything in my career in business, politics, and to some later years in history that's going to change things as much of that. When you think that it'd be very hard for anybody in this room to lay out the exact line between chemistry and physics, the next Nobel Prize. If they told you it was this or that, I wouldn't be able, and that's not a great judgment factor, be able to tell which of those departments it was in. So the bringing together of differing points of view and allowing the reason that Sam originally got me going on this program was the fact that you can use your common sense, you can use your own mind, you can listen, you can make your own mind up as to what's coming next. Now, John and Paul and Charlie have made an enormous difference. I don't think they know what it is that they've created. It's something, it's stunning, as George Schultz said, and it's something that's permanent. It's something that'll make things change. And we all know that we're in a world now where things have to change. So that's going to be very important. Now, the next important step was when John said, look, I've got things to do. If you can find somebody, and who can take on for me the leadership of putting this program together with Paul and Charlie's great help, then that would be help. And they came up with Betsy Bradley. Now we have a star. We have somebody that can take this forward and make the principles that they have established important in not only the history, but in health. Can you think of anything more important? I can't. I mean, we're all forced to think about the things that are important in our health program. So, Betsy, I can't tell you how pleased I am personally that you're willing to take this leadership. And I can't tell you how important it is that you have immediately earned the respect and guidance that John, Paul, and Charlie will give you. It's an amazing proposition. And so I go back to Schultz's words that this is stunning. It is stunning. Last of all, let's not forget that this took place in a university that was run by two important people, Rick Levin and Peter Salovey. These things just don't happen. They take leadership, and they take ability to wend your way in between the many forces that want to do this or do that, and come out with, and in the end, with something that's as brilliant and important as grand strategy. Now, I had some prepared remarks. I think I've made most of the things that are in this report. But if enthusiasm on my part, and I've been involved in private life, I've been involved in business, I've been involved in politics, I served it 4 or 5 years in the United States government. I am so excited about what's been created here. I'm going to just sit down and watch.
Great. I'm just going to say a few words here. Okay. Thank you so much, Nick. Terrific. Just a couple things, and then I'm going to introduce Linda Kulman, who will moderate the panel of our 3 founders. I actually have a lot in common with all of you. I didn't go to Yale, so I went to Yale for a PhD, but not undergraduate, so I don't really have that in common with you. I'm a woman, so I have that in common with several of you. Okay. It had to be said. And I do study a lot of international work. Sometimes it's about health, but sometimes it's a lot about security and economics too, so I have that in common with you. But the really important thing I have in common with you is I have learned at the feet of John Gaddis, Paul Kennedy, and Charlie Hill. And honestly, there's no academic who gets to go back to school once they're a tenured professor. And they have allowed me to do this. They've allowed me to take the classes, sit with them, ask them tons of silly questions, and then sort of set me free, which is, I think, what they probably have done for all of us. They've taught us something we never thought about before, gave us enough confidence, and then said, well, go try it. So I know you are dying to thank them as much as I am, and I'd like to have a large round of applause for the 3 people who have really made a difference in this school and this program. John, Paul, and Charlie. Thank you so much.
Betsy, thank you so much, and thank you all for having me. It's been such an honor to be at this school and to attend the program and get to know the professors and many of you who are here tonight over the past 5 years. Tonight, as you know, we have a distinguished panel that will be looking back at the first 15 years of the Grand Strategy program. These 3 professors truly need no introduction. But of course, I'm going to introduce them anyway. John Gaddis, in addition to being the founding director of the Brady-Johnson Program in Grand Strategy, is Yale's Robert A. Lovett Professor of Military and Naval History. Professor Gaddis is currently working on a book that he has tentatively titled On Grand Strategy. Paul Kennedy is the J. Richardson Dilworth Professor of British History, as well as the founding and current director of the International Security Studies Program at Yale. Professor Kennedy is currently working on a book that he says is significantly affected by his grand strategy experiences, which he has titled Victory at Sea, Grand Strategy and the Shift in the Global Power Balances, 1936 to 1946. In an email chain, Professor Gaddis explained that his book is also significantly affected by his experiences in the classroom, but pointed out that the title On Grand Strategy is shorter than Professor Kennedy's. Charles Hill, Yale's diplomat in residence, is also currently at work on a new book, but he cautioned me in an email, it's wise not to say so. So welcome. Before we jump into tonight's Q&A, I'd like to take a minute to tell you all how I came to be involved with the program. As with most of the good things in my life, this came about through my association with Nick Brady. For those of you who don't know Nick Brady, he is an avid worrier about big questions that need worrying about, whether it's emerging market debt, which Betsy mentioned earlier, which resulted in the Brady Plan when he was Treasury Secretary under President George H.W. Bush, or the role of technology on job displacement, which he and Chris Miller spent more than a year studying and writing about. 10 years ago, when I was working with Mr. Brady on his memoir, he began worrying about another question, and that was the lack of common sense being taught at our country's great universities, specifically at Yale. He viewed common sense as a key ingredient in leadership. Never content just to pinpoint a problem, he began looking for solutions. Should he hold a symposium on common sense, he wondered? Establish a professorship? As Mr. Brady pondered his options, Sam Chauncey, his great friend and friend of Yale, and now I'm pleased to say friend of mine, told him about the Grand Strategy Program, which was then in its 6th year. The more Mr. Brady looked at the program, the more he believed it was the antidote he'd been searching for. And so did another master of common sense, his friend Charlie Johnson. It didn't take Brady and Johnson long to decide to endow the program, and so in 2006, it became the Brady-Johnson Program in Grand Strategy. 5 years into their endowment, in 2011, Brady and Johnson began to think about the need to remember the program's history and intellectual roots for future generations. That's when the idea for this book was born, and having sat in on a class with him and written about Grand Strategy in his book, I was absolutely thrilled to be able to start coming up to Yale and attending the class. And besides attending the class, I had the opportunity to engage with the 3 professors here. One of the greatest challenges for me, I'm sure it was for all of you, was to understand how to reconcile their differing viewpoints on grand strategy. So I feel like I've been through a little bit of what you all have been through. But I'd really like to thank John, Paul, and Charlie for all you did to help make the book Teaching Common Sense happen. And now, with no further ado, let's get to the questions. I'm going to start this out for all of you. When you first started teaching in Grand Strategy in 2000, it seemed like a venture that might not last. But by my calculations, at this point, you've committed a combined total of 96 semesters, often teaching more than a full course load to teach Grand Strategy. From each of your perspectives, why was the course necessary to begin with, and why has it been so important to you to keep teaching it? John, do you want to start it off?
Oh, well, I'll try, Linda.
Just keep going, John. You're just...
Well, you see right here the problem, that happens. Nobody ever is allowed to go
No
more than a sentence or so. You take over, Paul.
No respect.
Charlie, you can answer the question.
Oh, well, I will. Since I invented grand strategy.
Right.
It's chronologically appropriate. It was important because when I resigned from the Foreign Service and went to Stanford, I was asked to teach a course, any course you want to teach, and I taught a course I called Statecraft, and I taught it 3 times, 3 semesters, and I vaguely concluded, it was a lecture course, not a seminar course, so I didn't have a lot of involvement with students. I had a vague sense that while the students were really interested in world affairs, foreign policy, the fate of the world, that they had almost no knowledge of the structure of international relations. It just wasn't there. But I said, well, this is Stanford, so okay. And then I went to the United Nations, appointed to the Office of the Secretary General, and Yale, then it was really Don Kagan who got this going, asked me to teach 1 afternoon a week in the then major called International Studies, which was designed so that there would be a seminar for seniors writing their senior essays in the major. And I was asked to teach the course on the United Nations. So I did that. And there I found that these were seniors, majors in international studies, and they knew nothing about the structure of international relations. They knew nothing about it, not about anything about the history of it, and not about treaties, not about conferences. Congress of Vienna was a mystery to them. Westphalia, so I said, I got to stop this, and started again, and I redid the course to call it Ideas and Institutions of International Affairs. So that left me with the idea that there was something wrong in the intellectual education of the people interested in the world. They were interested in it, but they didn't know how it was structured to work in the modern era. Then coming here and coming into contact with Paul and John, because we were neighbors over the back fence in the early mid-1990s, we began to realize that we were independently, all 3 of us, getting the same messages quietly from students who were migrating, voting with their feet, coming from certain other majors heading toward history with the plea, why can't we think big? I've majored in, I'll leave them to be unmentioned, major. We're not allowed to think big. We've got to think about a little tiny corner of a problem and try to make it scientific, because everything is scientistic around here. And so I didn't come to Yale for that. And so we began to say, okay, now we should address that. So on top of the non-awareness of the structure of international relations, I became aware that there was no knowledge about the higher level of thought about how the world works substantively, because somehow that had completely dropped out. And in my analysis of it, it probably happened in the 1960s and 70s. It had just been eradicated from the curriculum. But it had been there before. And our job, it seemed to me, and I think shared by John and Paul, was we had to try to revive that to be able to convey educationally to students that there is a structure of international relations and there's a higher level of the biggest problems that is above and beyond what the university usually does, any university nationally does in educating people about this. So that's how I came to it.
No, that's not how it happened at all. How it happened was that Paul and Charlie and I, in 1998, went over to Lewis Hall and we attended a briefing on the expansion of NATO. And the briefing officer, who was from NATO, was telling us that the expansion of NATO into Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia was going to go just fine, and it was going to work very well, and the Russians would be perfectly happy about this, and further expansion as well. And the test of this was that the committee structures in Brussels were all working so well together. And someone in the audience raised the question, sir, might it not be possible that by expanding NATO in the direction of Russia, you could perhaps drive the Russians into some kind of alliance with the Chinese, thereby recreating the Sino-Soviet alliance from the Cold War? And in front of 150 people, this guy from NATO hit his head like that, and he said, "Good God, we never thought of that." So we walked out, and we said to each other, something has to be done. Right?
It's not quite like that. But John is right. That was a scary briefing
moment. Yes, right.
session. It had arrived, though, his demonstration of not thinking about larger consequences, his demonstration of a lack of history, his demonstration of actually thinking of the globe as a whole and where China might fit into something which seemed to be only about Eastern Europe, did give us cause for pause. And it was at a time when, first of all, John Gaddis had joined this duo over here at Yale, arriving in 1996 from Ohio University, Athens. Charlie had come in from Stanford, his beloved Stanford, as he says. And there was a possibility about doing something which couldn't be done before. So let me, if I may, Linda, just offer a bigger thought here. There comes a time in an intellectual movement, a development, perhaps an area of scholarship in a particular university, in a particular generation, when like one or two things come together and allow you to do something which you mightn't have been able to do 15 years earlier, and which would seem so obvious to do 15 years later. There's what Young, Charlie likes Young called a conjunction. So Charlie mentioned that we were all dissatisfied that within academia, within a variety of disciplines, there had been a very interesting turn towards micro-histories, micro-studies, look at smaller aspects of your particular discipline. We thought possibly to the loss of a bigger picture, and it was time to perhaps turn that around. It would not have been possible, I think, for a single scholar at Yale in the 1990s to do it. It was possible if you thought of putting together a diplomatic military historian, a trained diplomat himself and State Department official, a Cold War historian heading towards a biography of Kennan, and began some fusion at a time when we could also look around at the possibilities of teaching in a new way at Yale, teaching a year-long course. That is not forbidden. It's actually a rather logical thing to do, but I hadn't thought of teaching a course of 2 parts, which starts in January, goes to May, then in the middle has a chance for all of the students in it to go and do something, an experience in the summer, and then come back in the second half and be able to do it not just for graduate students, which was my original conception, but as Charlie and Don wanted it, for undergraduate students as well. And what's more, we knew we had such rich materials around it. They were lying there. Thucydides, Bismarck, origins of the Second World War, Churchill, Kennan, Cold War. We could teach an awful lot of stuff about big topics, large trends in history, large lessons to be pulled out of getting the students to read Thucydides, the Romans, Clausewitz. And we could do it in a way which we thought would be good for Yale and good for the students, but actually if other people came along later and looked at what we were doing, they might actually think we could teach a grand strategy course at Virginia or Dartmouth or back at the Naval War College or in many other places. So it was worth a chance of doing it, but it needed to be at that particular time of discontent with small-scale histories and small-scale thinking, bringing at least 3 people like this together because you needed that larger mass, putting it in a teaching structure which fitted in at Yale, and using materials which were there, and then well, there we were. The year was 2000, 2001, and we were creating it, and we were off to the races. It was as simple as that. It was my idea all the time, and not Johnny Hill's. Sorry, Linda.
It's nice to be up here with the dueling professors, I have to say.
It's great to have you.
Charlie, one of the underpinnings of the course is to train students to be comfortable with ambiguity or uncertainty. I know you always quote F. Scott Fitzgerald at the beginning of every spring semester. But what I wanted to know, was this always one of the underpinnings of the program? And how does ambiguity tie into grand strategy? And actually, how do you teach it? And the other thing is, how is a tolerance for ambiguity reflected in your own experiences as a Foreign Service officer?
Ambiguity is another word for uncertainty. And the line between certainty, what can be approached by methodologies of certainty, and the area where you are in uncertainty and you cannot be certain, is the critical line in the life of the mind, in the life of the university and how it is organized over or across around the universe of knowledge. Because most of the university and most of society is really focused on achieving certainty through formulae, through methodologies, through quantification, through big data, through all kinds of forms that will give you as a decision maker pretty close to something certain as to how it's going to come out when you do something. That's 3/4 of or more of the university. But beyond that, kind of above the tree line, lies uncertainty, where when you are in a position of having to make decisions at the highest levels of national security or any field in business or wherever you are, you will know that when you are in that realm where you can't predict, you have to make a decision before you possibly can know how it's going to turn out, before you can possibly have run all the studies, run the numbers, done all of the preparation for it that bureaucrats and policy analysts do for you. You can't do it. And so then what do you do? Where do you turn in the university to begin to be comfortable with that? You can't be comfortable with it, but to not be surprised by it. And that's in the realm of the humanities. And the humanities is really all, whether it's literature, art, music, philosophy, history. It's all dealing with the area of uncertainty when you have got to make a decision and you have no idea what to do, except if you have been in an education that can give you some sense that it's going to happen to you. So in what we have been teaching in grant strategy and kind of preparing for that in teaching freshmen in directed studies, that's where you get into areas of uncertainty. The Odyssey is nothing but uncertainty. Odysseus just goes from one uncertain moment to another, and it's got to decide on the spot, what the hell do I do now? At the end of the Odyssey, it's Penelope. Penelope, just the entire end of the Odyssey is 25 different cases where Penelope doesn't know what's going to happen, and she has to make a decision. So we got to get into that, and the only way to do that is what we have been doing. It's been eradicated, and we all now know that the humanities have been downgraded. They have been deteriorated. The funding has gone down. The families say to students, why are you studying that? And we have to argue back with that. But what it is the elimination of this entire field where you are being prepared to deal with issues at the very highest level. Now, in my experience, it happened almost every day. But I was thinking, and maybe people here can advise me on this, about this a couple of days ago, when we had the U.S. Navy destroyer, the USS Nitze. Paul Nitze was, his grandson was this grand strategy student, steaming off Yemen, and suddenly it is fired upon by a ship-killing missile coming from Houthi rebels on the Yemeni coast. Now, as far as I know, we didn't know that there were Iranian-supplied ship-killing missiles in the hands of the Houthi rebels in Yemen. And so the commander of that destroyer suddenly has got a missile coming at him, and it's going to destroy the destroyer. And that's an act of war in international law. And suppose it didn't hit. Suppose it had hit the destroyer and destroyed the USS Nitze in the Arabian Sea. That's uncertainty. What are you going to do? What is Charlie Adell going to do back in the policy planning staff when that news comes into him? What's he going to say? Have we planned for that? That's what I'm talking about.
Thank you. John and Paul, since we know about your books, I wondered if each of you would take a few minutes to tell us about your books, but also tell us how the Grand Strategy program has affected your thinking that you're putting into the book.
Well, I can start with that. The current book that I'm writing with the short title, On Grand Strategy, totally modest title, I think.
It's very short,
right.
very short title, right?
Right. Spins off of one of Charlie Hill's favorite oracular pronouncements in class. And those of you who've been in the class know that Charlie makes these great pronouncements, but he doesn't tell you what they mean. He just leaves them hanging out there. And one of his favorites is the Scott Fitzgerald pronouncement, that the sign of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold contradictory ideas in the mind at the same time and retain the ability to function. And the students all say, how profound, how deep, how wonderful. Yes, yes, yes. But Professor Hill never tells us what that means. It's just out there. And this contributes to the mystique of it. It contributes just to the uncertainty that Charlie is talking about here, for sure, and so on. And so after years of this, I began to view this as a challenge. And so I decided to write a book explaining what it really means. And that's the book that I'm working on. It starts actually earlier than our class does. It starts with Herodotus and Xerxes crossing the Hellespont. But it goes through Thucydides. It goes through Octavian Augustus. It goes through St. Augustine, who we don't deal with in class, and Machiavelli, who we do deal with in class. But they are both in the same chapter, which I think has not been done before. There's a chapter on Elizabeth and Philip. There's a chapter on the American founding fathers. There's a chapter on Clausewitz and Tolstoy, which I also think has not perhaps been done before. And there is now, I'm halfway through, a chapter on Lincoln as a grand strategist. But this is a book, as I was explaining to Linda over dinner, that is writing itself. It's a book that I had no grand strategy or grand design for. It's a book in which each idea leads me to some other idea. But almost all of these ideas have in one way or another come out of teaching this class for some 2 decades or so. You can't help but teach a class and learn something from teaching a class. Learn something from the readings. Learn something from your students. Go home at night and bug your wife with discussions of what you've learned or what the mysteries are and so on and so forth. This is really what the book is about. I have no idea where it's going to end, how far up it's going to come, but I'm at the stage in life where I don't particularly care about that. I don't have any deadlines other than the one mortality will impose, so it's been enormous fun to write this book. And really, all of the familiar faces that I see out in this room tonight are in one way or another in this book, through the questions you've raised in class about what we've had you read, through what you've read on your own, through what you've made of your careers, but through what you have most importantly taught us. Paul?
Well, when my present book is finished, I certainly am thinking of things in the future as well, and I do care a lot about the future and after my book. I started a few years ago responding to a suggestion that I write a history of navies and sea power at the time of the Second World War. And that was something I've written about on and off for many years, and it was fairly easy to see that if one gave it a title like Victory at Sea, with dates around it, it would sell a copy or two. And it would be fairly easy to see how it could be structured, starting in the year 1939 and finishing in the year 1945. And I have arranged the book in chronological order and started writing on a number of the chapters. But I think it's the teaching or the approaches which come out of our grand strategy class and come out of thinking about the larger picture and bigger structures about war and peace, which caused me to see I could write about this book at the level of unfolding of the maritime struggles in the Atlantic and the Mediterranean and Arctic, and then over in the Pacific. And I could do essentially narrative work and chronological work, Linda, but I could give it much more grand strategical heft than had I tried to write this 30 years or something ago, 20 years ago. And it occurred to me that I could do so because I could take a particular instance or instances in the narrative and then step back as a grand strategical historian might do and say, well, what does this mean, or isn't this significant? In writing about the war in the middle year of the conflict of the Battle of the Pacific, that is in 1943, I was struck by the fact that in 1943, at the beginning, the United States had lost all of its aircraft carriers by then. Every one apart from the single old aircraft carrier Saratoga. All of the 6 aircraft carriers prior to the war had gone. It was left with one carrier, needed to borrow a carrier from the British to get through. And in June 23rd, 1943, the brand new USS Essex, large, fast, modern carrier, arrived in Pearl Harbor and started altering the balance. And in August, the next Essex-class carrier started coming into Pearl Harbor, and a couple of months later, another one. And then they were coming in so thick and fast that essentially the war was over for Japan, because by the time naval operations were being resumed against the Caroline Islands and the Marshall Islands in early 1944, the United States had 15 large new Essex-class carriers and about 23 smaller new mid-fleet carriers. It was producing about 84,000 aircraft in that year alone. And there was some sort of real connect between the bigger shifts in the global historical balances, which would be a grand strategical view of things, and what was going to happen in the actual conflicts in the Pacific. You could actually do feedback loops between the smaller and the operational level of things and the grand strategical level of things, as we had been trying to teach our students you could do in our classes. So I felt, wow, I can actually enjoy writing history at multiple levels, from the narrative of events and conflicts and individual battles, but pull back and ask, what are the larger, broader, grand strategical shifts which are occurring in the war at this time, which are going to explain for myself and for the readers the outcome of the conflict. So I feel very much charged by and stimulated by thinking at the grand strategical level and really enjoying the narrative of the war level at the same time.
Charlie, are you sure you don't want to talk about this mysterious book of yours?
It's not wise to talk about the books you are writing before they are finished. But I will say something about what I'm writing on. Phil Rucker is running for the door with a scoop. It comes out of our work with Henry Kissinger, or his work with us, because Kissinger has been very attracted to the grand strategy idea and very close to Nick Brady on this. And in Kissinger's college dissertation, which is titled The Meaning of History, there is a sentence that says that without a profound metaphysics, no philosophy of history can satisfy humanity's desire for meaning. It's a very powerful, fraught sentence, because it deals with the fact that we are in a non or even anti-metaphysical age. Theology is gone, religion has been sidelined according to the precepts of the modern age, and people are living without meaning. And the idea here is that somewhere in this upper range of thinking about grand strategic issues, there may be problems, if addressed in a philosophical and almost neo-theological way, can provide meaning for a secular age. And that's what I'm working on.
During the cocktail hour, some of you left questions that I've folded into this panel. So this is one of those. Can grand strategy exist in a campus culture that is, I have to put on my glasses here, increasingly characterized by political correctness and a need for safe spaces? Who wants to take that one?
I know who wants to.
The great change in the last, between probably most of you here, going back many years now, and the last few years, is the remarkable change in the context, the social context that students have to survive and thrive in, that is revolutionary and deleterious. So it has to affect students today. It is affecting them, and those in college at this moment mostly don't realize it's affecting them or that it's any different than it always has been. But it is very different. And it is the temper of the times or the zeitgeist or whatever. And it has to do with things that are new, novel, and troubling. And one of them is social media and the electronic flooding of data and information and screens that students have to live within, that is almost, by my observation, creating a new level of anxiety in the collective nervous system. It is in the realm of entertainment, where everything has been changed into entertainment. Now, politics are entertainment. Everything is being done and analyzed and publicized as entertainment, and people are following it as entertainment. There is the bizarre, to me, from a distance, strange, new non-relationship between men and women in ways that are regulated and coached and instructed upon and punished, that are, as Chairman Mao would say, they are antagonistic contradictions. They don't work together. I don't know how students survive with this. It's the strange narrowing of what careers are out there for you. And then there is the underpinning deterioration of what I talked about at the very beginning, of the structures of how the world works. So I think only in the last 5, 7 years, 8 years, 10 years maybe, there's a new context that make teaching grand strategy more and more difficult for students to grasp it.
Well, yes, I so disagree. Look, I don't disagree with Charlie's description of some of the things which are happening in academia, but I just totally refuse to be ruffled or upset. Let's go to your question again, or go to the person's question. How did it go?
Now I have to put my glasses back on. Can grand strategy exist in a campus culture that is increasingly characterized by political correctness and a need for safe spaces?
Yes. I mean, why get so frazzled, ladies and gentlemen, about political correctness? Why get so upset that there is a call by some of the groups of students for safeness and safe spaces? That does not, to me, represent the totality of what's going on in the teaching experience and the pedagogical experience here. I'm back teaching a junior seminar of mine called The Origins of the Second World War, which, because I've had to teach so many other courses for international studies and for global studies, etc., I haven't taught it for 5 or 6 years now, and I'm coming in with some of the students who were in that class 6 or 7 years ago, and they said, "Do you still like teaching it?" And I thought, I am so excited when I go into that class. On Wednesday this week, I was with 15 Yale juniors talking about Neville Chamberlain and the unfolding of British appeasement policy in the 30s. And they were jumping, and I was jumping, and so many of us teaching here, I can see people like Brian and John nodding their heads, the experience of just teaching with committed Yale intellectual undergraduates, not a care in the world about political correctness. This is what we came to do. This is what we wanted to do. We wanted to be with a Yale professor talking about whether it is Shakespeare or whether it is about Neville Chamberlain or whether it is about Kennan and the Cold War. Here we have it. And it is just exhilarating to me and a privilege to me to do it. So when I pick up as my daily morning punishment the Wall Street Journal and finds it, goes at me or goes at us or goes at Yale about the politically correct, dim-witted professors wilting under this attack from the left, or wilting under the attack of cultural idiocies. I think, well, actually, I'm not wilting under the attack of cultural idiocies. I'm not wilting under the attack of political correctness. I don't give a... Samuel Johnson must have... No, the word was fig. You got it wrong, Nori. You thought it was something else because it began with an F. I don't give a fig about political correctness. We have been teaching this class, and it's changing as it goes on. It's evolving, and it's what I believe students do want to come and teach. And I have one other thing to say about that sort of view that it's terrible in academia now and you can't teach it. You can teach it. I give up. Take over from me, will you? I am speechless at the idea that political correctness is doing anything to stop us from doing what we want. Professor Gaddis, the floor is yours.
Well, let me put it another way. Let me take a quick poll of the students who've actually taken the class. And I would like to see a show of hands of how many students felt unsafe when you did your Marshall briefs in our class. Right. All right, I would like to see a poll of how many people thought it was subsequently and professionally useful to have been made to feel unsafe by doing the Marshall briefs. So I think what we have been doing all along with the second half of our course, which is the applied portion of the course, is to create a certain lack of safety within the parameters of a classroom by allowing our students to deliver policy briefs and not allowing them to get more than about 2 minutes into it before we begin tearing the brief apart in front of the whole class, with a view to making a very important point about safe spaces. The world beyond Yale will not be safe. The world beyond Yale will be filled with unsafe spaces. And Yale would not be doing its duty if it does not prepare its students for those unsafe places. That's the way we feel about it.
Paul, you said just a minute ago that the Grand Strategy course is evolving. And here's a question. How should the course evolve to match the future, if at all?
The reference to evolving was clearly, perhaps it wasn't so clear, but surely it should be, the transition from John and myself and Charlie to Betsy, the move to look at non-state developments and transnational issues of international security, which would include demographic, environmental, global health issues, but at the same time also asking the basic methodological questions about the use of evidence, the relationship of the big picture to the study of the exact case study that we're looking at the time. It's going to change in, especially I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, if you're not going that direction, Betsy, but I think it is, you are. It's going to change very much more in the in the second half, in the policy briefs and the discussion of contemporary world issues and how you approach it, than it is in the first half, in the spring, where I think surely the classic texts of grand strategy are going to be there because they just so easily lend themselves even to the contemporary newer topics which are part of the evolving syllabus of grand strategy.
Linda, I'd like to answer the question in a different way and put it in the context of things that our students began to gradually call to our attention. Because in our case studies on Metternich and Bismarck, we had always made the point with the students that Metternich and Bismarck ultimately failed because they did not train successors. And sure enough, after a while, after about 8 or 9 years into the program, we began to get student papers back on Metternich and Bismarck saying Metternich and Bismarck had failed because they had not trained their successors, and then there'd be a little footnote at the bottom. And what are the grand strategy students doing? Are the grand strategy professors doing to train their successors? So we had this kind of tug at our sleeve, very politely and very discreetly from the grand strategy students all along. And then one day, about 6 years ago, my phone rang, and it was Nick. It's often Nick when my phone rings, for sure. And it's always very useful advice. But what Nick said was, I think he put it explicitly in these terms, you guys are not getting any younger. And then what he meant, but didn't actually put in these words, you guys could croak at any time. And so he said, from a completely different practical perspective, not having read the student papers, you should begin thinking about a successor. And he was absolutely right. So we got it from both sides in this regard. If it had been left to us, we would have thought we would go on forever, probably. But it was not left to us, and that was indeed a good thing. So out of that push that we were getting from two different sides, we did begin to think about avoiding the fates of Metternich and Bismarck, and we did begin to think about how could we train a successor. And of course, what you always do in a situation of uncertainty like that is to consult Sam Chauncey. And this we did. And Sam said, keep an eye on Betsy Bradley. And this was long before Betsy became master of Branford or any of her other present distinctive positions. But we approached her. Sam approached her. Somebody approached her. She began showing up in class. We know that. But very quietly attending class, very modestly attending class, sitting in the back, taking notes, often not saying anything, listening very carefully as well. And the more we got to know her, the more we respected her, the more we admired her, and the more it just fell into place that she would be the logical successor to us. And the reason it was logical was that it was different. She was different. She would change the program. That was in itself logical. Programs cannot remain the same. They aren't healthy if they turn into fossils. And so our program has certain protections against being fossilized, and they rest with Betsy particularly. And that's because she will take us into a range of new topics. She has taken us already into a range of new faculty. She has recruited a group of younger faculty, some of whom are sitting in this room, who would not otherwise, I think, have become part of the Grand Strategy program had they not had confidence that Betsy would be running it in the future. She has changed us in terms of gender perspectives. This program had the reputation of being run by old, well, I won't go there, but, so that perspective certainly has changed. That perception has changed around campus. And she is a wonderful combination of, first of all, a determination to continue what works, and indeed to continue the fundamental structure of the class, which is, as Paul said, largely the emphasis on the classics in the spring semester, but also to experiment with change. In the fall semester, the policy relevant portions of the class. And so we have had many discussions about how you walk this fine line between continuity and change. But I want Betsy to express before this group my admiration in all kinds of ways for the intelligence and the grace and the skill and the tact with which you have handled this transition. I could not be more pleased with a successor than as director of the program than I am with you. As Chairman Mao said to one of his underlings, who I think later was sent to the countryside, Chairman Mao said, with you in charge, I can sleep better at night. Is that correct, Charlie? Well, we're not sending Betsy to any countryside. We're happy to have her. We're happy to have her running the program. This is the best thing that has happened to the program because it does ensure continuity. It does ensure continued life and vigor. And Nick, to his great credit, saw the importance of this very early on and has supported us in this transition and has supported Betsy at every step of the way. So we are extremely fortunate in this regard. And tonight's dinner, and indeed Linda's book, reflects just how fortunate we are with this transition that has been made.
Thank you.
So I want to suggest again a round of applause for Betsy.